We are recording, I believe.
Good evening, everybody. My name's David Beeney from Breaking the Silence. Have you ever had that experience where you bump into someone, meet them, and you feel like you've known them for years? And when you get to know each other, you discover you have a really similar passion. Well, about 3 years ago, I was late at night at a festival, and I bumped into the amazing Natasha Wallace. And we share really similar passions about well-being. You may well have read this amazing book, The Conscious Effect by Natasha. Well, we've decided to start a series of podcasts, and we're just going to see where we go with them. And tonight what we're going to do is simply try and understand, where did our passions for well-being emanate from? Where did it all start for us? And why do we want to make a difference with our work in this well-being space? So, good evening, Natasha. How are you?
Oh, yeah, great, thanks. I love that shameless book plug right at the beginning there. I was unprepared for that.
I always have it with me here. And if you haven't read it, it's a great read, by the way, but we're not going to mention it again in the whole podcast, okay? Natasha, where did it all begin for you? When did you first realize that you really wanted to make a difference around well-being? Where did it all start?
So it started when I left my last job. Well, probably not just as I left it, but in the months leading up to me deciding to leave. I'd worked in the same company for 10 years. I was people and development director. And for all intents and purposes, like, everything looked great. So I had, nice job, good income, shiny car. It all sort of looked,
Yep.
as if I'd made it. And I'd often have people say to me, "Oh, you're really successful, you've done really well." And there was just something that felt lacking for me. Like, I always felt like there was something that, like an emptiness, and I didn't really know what it was. And coming up to the last few months of my job, I was absolutely exhausted. I had worked probably too hard for too long in a bid to, make the biggest possible difference that I could. I just worked myself into the ground. So I had no balance in my life whatsoever, and I didn't take care of myself at all. It was either work or look after the children, and that was pretty much it. And I felt regularly disappointed and despondent at my inability to make the headway that I wanted to in the company that I worked for. And it started getting to the point where I felt like I was like this with the leadership team. Right. Not that we were sort of in conflict with each other, but it's almost like we didn't get each other. Like, my vision and my purpose just didn't really align to theirs. And actually, over the course of a number of months, towards the end, that just floored me. And so I ended up burning out, which is part of my story and is part of the story that I tell when I speak. But a lot of people have asked me what led to my burnout. I guess making an assumption that it was because I worked really hard, but actually that wasn't it. I think I could have carried on working really, really hard if I felt like I was getting to where I needed to be or where I wanted to be, as if I was fulfilling my purpose. I'm not condoning it, because I still had no balance, and I think you do need to. But the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, was the fact that I actually ended up not feeling like I fitted anymore. Wow. And I had my first adult experience of sort of feeling a bit excluded, feeling like I was working outside of the group. And it was a bit of an epiphany for me, because after years of working on culture change and feeling like I was a specialist when it came to people and behaviour change and leadership development, I realised that I had neglected myself. I didn't have enough self-knowledge to understand that my own purpose and my own needs weren't being met. And I also wasn't taking care of myself. And it was a bit of a wake-up call to me, which was, actually, You can do all of the leadership development in the world. You can run culture change. You can manage change programs. You can be a leader for years and years and years. But actually, unless you are taking care of yourself and unless you have balance in your life, and I don't just mean hours, I'm sure at some point we will talk about what well-being really is. But unless you've got balance in your life and unless you are developing yourself as a person and really understand yourself and pay attention to that and the impact that that self-knowledge has on you and on other people, that actually you're not developing as a leader. You're maybe not leading others as effectively as you should be, and you're certainly not leading yourself as effectively as you should be. And that was it for me. As soon as I sort of realized that about myself, I then started to make sense of all of the things that were happening around me and how other leaders were feeling and why other leaders were behaving in the way that they were. And I just thought, right, I've got to go and help to fix this. One, to help people avoid the same fate as me. But secondly, because actually just through a little bit more know-how and understanding, I probably could have avoided my fate, which ended up being, you know, somebody who was totally lacking in confidence, exhausted, suffering with all sorts of physical ailments. And, you know, I fell off my horse. It took me quite a long time to get back on it again. So that was it for me. I thought I need to help fix this. And it was whilst I was going through that epiphany that you and I met.
That was a huge line you used when you said you felt you weren't fitting in. I really felt that there. As a, you know, you associate that with school if you're not picked to be in the football team or the netball team, and or your mates have ganged up on you and you're not part of a crowd. But to feel like you're being successful in your career at one stage, but all of a sudden you're not fitting in, that was a really powerful thing to say.
It was devastating. It was absolutely devastating. And then, you know, after that, I did research into inclusion and actually read about the fact that feeling excluded hurts physically, being rejected hurts physically. And it hurt me. I felt, and this wasn't anybody doing it to me. I don't think anybody involved in this situation that I was a part of was malicious or tried to exclude me or wanted to push me out or wanted me to feel like I didn't fit in. And of course, I had my own part to play in it. You know, sometimes it is a situation where you are not operating in a way that allows you to fit. And I definitely had some part to play in it, but I did feel excluded and it was incredibly difficult. And I think I did a talk at a conference last year where I told this story about this senior leader that I knew. And I told my story and all of the different sort of parts of it and how this person felt and how awful it was and what was going on for them. And you could see as I was telling this story, people's faces were just like, oh my goodness, that just is awful. And some knowing nods and like, yeah, you know, this is a big audience. And then right at the end of the talk, I said, and that person was actually me. You could have like blown people over with a feather, you know, not people over with a feather. To see somebody who'd been in this sort of senior level position, who seemingly was successful and able, actually saying I felt excluded, just seemed like a big shock for people. And it made me realize that anybody can feel excluded. Anybody, for so many different reasons, and now I do work around this because I think it's so important that nobody is made to feel like that.
Well, we both work with a lot of senior people these days, and we know that some very senior people feel incredibly lonely in their roles. They may be surrounded by hundreds of people in a corporate world, but it can be an incredibly lonely role wherever you are, whatever level you're at. Interestingly, earlier on, you talked about discovering purpose. And I think it was about 12 years ago that I was helping some external trainers deliver some training. And I wasn't fully aware of the program. And all of a sudden, they introduced a session that was called What is Your Purpose? And I thought, this sounds really interesting. I thought, because what's my purpose? So rather than help them, I chose to join in and be a participant. And I sat on a table with a a group of people who all knew me fairly well. And they immediately turned to me and said, David, let's start with you because you're really easy to do. I said, what do you mean I'm easy to do? They said, well, we all know exactly what your purpose is. And I said, well, please tell me because I don't know what it is. And they said, you like to make people feel better about themselves. And everyone nodded and straight away told me that that was my purpose. And round about the same time, I'd had a panic attack on holiday that I didn't have a coping mechanism for. So when I got back from holiday, I chose to get some counseling for the first time since I was very, very young. And in one of the first sessions I had with this counselor, she turned to me and said, you'd make a really good counselor because, you know, you've got lots of stories to tell and you're very empathic and you're not particularly judgmental. And I think that, you know, you should look at changing the direction of your career in media to go into the world of counseling. And because I'd only recently heard that my purpose was I like to make people feel better about themselves, I suddenly started looking into courses to become a mental health counselor. I still didn't think I'd end up doing what I do now, but that was when I first started to come out of media thinking, I've discovered my purpose in life. I like to make people feel better about themselves. And then many years later, I chose to out myself for the first time in 36 years about my mental health. And as you might have heard me say before, it resonated with more people and at a deeper level than anything I've done in my life before. However, and it's a massive however, people kept coming up to me and saying, David, thanks for sharing your mental health story. Tonight I've realized I'm normal, but I'm going to be honest with you, David, I could never share with my employer my true mental health because I think it would have a negative impact on my career. And more people contacted me saying I couldn't share my true mental health with my employer. So I chose in the beginning of 2017, and round about the time I met yourself again, that where I needed to focus my energy was to go into organizations and businesses to help them to create a kinder culture where people could really truly open up and be honest about their mental health and feel really safe to do so. And that's what led me to do what I do now. And I can't believe what I do. It's like I've trained all of my life to do what I do now, but didn't know what I was training for. And because I wear three hats, I've got my own mental health story, which helps, you know, hopefully me connect authentically with my audiences. Secondly, I'm a qualified mental health counselor. But thirdly, I spent years in the corporate sector, like you, trying to create cultures where people flourished. And ironically, I bring those three together now to try and make a difference around culture and well-being. But it's fascinating hearing your journey and the epiphany you had and the falling off the horse. And it's sometimes in life, a crisis comes along that can really help you to discover, you know, more about who you are and what you really want to do. So what's the difference you really want to make? You know, Natasha Wallace has written this brilliant book. I've mentioned it again. But what if you were trying to be really succinct with me? What are you on this planet to do?
You know that I've never been succinct, David. I'm here to help leaders and their teams become more conscious of themselves and each other so that they can take better care. So that's a cheesy strapline, but I think ultimately the more we know about ourselves, the more we understand ourselves as people, and the more that we normalize taking care of ourselves, which it amazes me that I even have to justify that. You know, sometimes I'll say it, you know, we need to take better care of ourselves, and I say it in a corporate environment or an organizational setting, and I almost can feel the sort of slight like, oh, that's not very commercial. Take care of yourself. We're here to deliver. And you know, you still get leaders in businesses who are like, what is all of this? This is nonsense. Nobody was talking about taking care of themselves when I was coming through. When I was coming through the ranks, we just came in, we did the job, we did a good job, and you know, we were all fine. I actually don't necessarily disagree with that. You know, that may be true.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
If you were on an aeroplane
Yeah.
with your two gorgeous daughters,
yeah,
and the oxygen mask came down,
yeah.
who would you put the oxygen mask on first?
Well, I mean, obviously, I've written about this in my book. Yeah, well, of course, it has to be you, doesn't it?
So Natasha, you're actually being selfish if you don't put yourself first. Because if you don't look after yourself and you become ill, your two daughters, that's not fair on them. And so whether you're a business leader or you're the head of a family, it's actually selfish not to put yourself first, because if you're not looking after your own well-being and you become poorly, you then can't look after people around you.
Yeah.
So me time is so important.
It is. But I think we've been conditioned to take care of business, whatever business is, whether that's the kids or whether it's work or the team. So like, okay, so you go into businesses day after day talking about mental health, talking about removing the stigma and normalizing the conversation around mental health. But you must come across people, leaders who are like, what, why are we having this conversation? Or what is this? How do you convince leaders who have led in a certain way? And I don't like the idea that these are bad leaders. It's just a mindset, or it's a resilience, or it's an experience that they've had that's worked for them. How do you convince a leader who doesn't think it's necessary to have conversations about mental health in the workplace, that it is necessary and that it would actually improve things?
Well, I'll say something now that may surprise people, bearing I'm known as the mental health guy. I would get rid of the word mental at midnight tonight and never have it used again, because we've changed the meaning of it forever. No one likes to associate with the word mental because it's got such negative connotations, but we all want healthier minds. So what I'm really saying here with senior leaders, they're never going to particularly buy into strategies around mental health, because they'll think it's HR's latest thing. They'll realize they're under some pressure from the media to do something about it. So I think we have to change the language that we're using. One of my clients, and I won't name them on this podcast, but their well-being strategy was called driving energy through our organization. And because they talked about driving energy, it really opened up the mindsets to many of their leaders who perhaps wouldn't have bought into a well-being strategy if we'd have called it mental health awareness. So I think the language we use is really, really important. But I'm really serious, Natasha. I would get rid of the word mental. I think we've changed it forever. And I'll give you an example of how the imagery associated with it is so negative. If you and I typed into Google Images now, mental health, you'd see a picture of someone like me with their head in their hands looking really sad. But if you typed into Google Images physical health, we'd see pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Usain Bolt and amazingly fit bodies. So why is physical health so positive and mental health so negative? We don't like that word anymore. So I think, let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of it from tonight.
Okay, well, we'll do that. We might not come up on any Google searches.
No, we might not. That's a good point.
What about resilience? Because I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the word resilience, but once again, it's a word that's used by a lot of organizations. I mean, do you think that that's a relevant word in modern day business?
I personally like it. It's a very subjective thing, isn't it? I think your resilience is your mental toughness. And it's a word I particularly like, but I think we should bring into this chat the chat we had before we started about linking vulnerability with resilience, because I think your insight into the relationship between those two words is really quite insightful. So do you want to share that?
Yes. Okay. So obviously I was telling you that I'm doing some Gestalt training at the moment.
Yeah.
We were on a group training session this morning and talking about the sort of true meaning, according to this Gestalt, amazing Gestalt facilitator who takes our training. The true meaning of resilience is to be courageous and vulnerable. And I was saying to you that I use those two things separately, as sort of separate things, but actually recognizing what happens when you bring them together. So we were talking about the fact that you need to be able to take care of yourself, you need to recognize that there's a vulnerability, because otherwise what are you taking care of? It's like, you know, dusting the piano behind me. If there's no dust on it, what am I dusting? So it's almost like the recognition that something needs to be taken care of in order to sustain it. And I think, you know, we both work incredibly hard and we talk about taking care of ourselves. But actually, unless we are able to show some vulnerability, even to ourselves, to say, I know that if I continue to work like this, I won't feel as good. Or I know if I continue to work like this, my children may not feel great, or my partner may not, or there will be some sort of ripple effect, some knock-on effect of the way that I'm working, the way that I'm thinking, the way that I'm behaving. So unless you are vulnerable, unless you say, actually, it's not as good as it could be at the moment, so I need to take better care, then actually there is a risk that you just feel fine, or you bolster yourself and you're that resilient person who keeps on pushing through, and that you don't care for yourself in the way that you should.
No, it's evidence-based now to back up what you've just said, that a CEO is more likely to lose his job in the boardroom if he doesn't show vulnerability. It's proven that when you show vulnerability, you're more likely to keep the dressing room with you, because you will inspire people around you. And there's many people in boardrooms who really struggle with that. They still think that you can't show what they regard as weakness. I was working with a law firm, and I was talking about this very subject, and all of a sudden all the heads turned to the left, and this very tall man, who's a senior partner in this law firm, he stood up and he said, okay, I'll tell you the real reason why David's here. I'm currently in therapy. And he even put his hand in his pocket and he produced some medication he was on as well. And people were open-mouthed because he was a very alpha male, very senior, successful lawyer. And his colleagues were shocked. But we then had like an I'm Spartacus moment in the room, because he sat down and then another senior lawyer stood up and said, okay, I've had mental health challenges, I've had depression, I've never shared it before. And then another senior lady lawyer stood up and said, yeah, okay, my sister took her own life and started crying and shared challenges with her mental health. And it was just an amazing moment to watch, because the moment the senior partner stood up and shared his mental health, what he was doing was giving permission for everyone in that organization to say, do you know what? It really is okay not to be okay. And perhaps we'll inspire people around us when we share these vulnerabilities. And I sat there thinking, wow. And sadly, Natasha, I've worked with many law firms, and I work with the Law Society, and they've still got some real challenges. It's one of those professions where they're still struggling to create cultures where a lawyer can admit, do you know what? I've got challenges with my mental health, because they're lawyers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is tough. And I mean, even I'm stumped sometimes when people turn around and say, like, why do we need to do all of this? I talk a lot about consciousness and about getting to know yourself and self-knowledge in order to improve yourself. But if you're stood there saying, well, I'm actually fine, I'm all right, why do I need to improve? Then that's very difficult. If you don't realize that your life is a constant journey of learning and improvement and trying to be the best version of yourself and trying to give the best version of what you can give, unless you don't believe that, or unless you do believe that, you're not going to necessarily want to make the changes. I think it's the same.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think you're so right. And I think most people still don't know the signs to spot in themselves when their mental health is starting to deteriorate. And therefore, often people don't share their challenges with mental health because they're not even aware that they've got any mental health challenges. This will sound really weird for me to say now, but I've battled with mental health throughout my life. But I only realized about 10 years ago that a phobia is a mental health issue. I just used to think I had like phobias related to the claustrophobia family. Didn't realize it was mental health. But I think so many people aren't aware of actually what mental health is. And I think that in our next podcast, possibly we should try and dispel some of those myths and help people understand what are the signs to look for in yourself, those early signs that you should get some help. But I think, Natasha, this has been a really enjoyable first attempt at one of our podcasts. I've enjoyed it. I hope the thousands of people that are going to listen to it are going to enjoy it too. If they do miss the podcast, I really think that they should read your book anyway, because it's a great read. But thank you for joining me tonight, and let's hope this is the first of a number of podcasts, because in all seriousness, I think we've got such a passion for this subject, and but we bring different things to the party. Yes, my training is very much in mental health, and you've got a fantastic career in HR, and I think that there's a lot of good conversation for us to have, isn't there?
Absolutely. And also we can bring our practical day-to-day experiences of the work that we're doing with people.
Yes.
And I think that's so important. I think trying to avoid speaking in the generic and actually bringing, you know, the lived human experiences of people to try and help people make sense of all of this and to take better care of themselves and each other, so that they not only avoid mental ill health or try to manage it, but that they end up being sort of a thriving best version of themselves. I think that, you know, any conversation that we can have to raise awareness of that is going to be so important.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you very much, everyone who's listened to this podcast. We hope you listen to many more podcasts to come. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.